Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 886 for August 4th, 2021. If you're listening to these midweek episodes for the first time, we have started to release audio versions of our weekly Friday happy hour live webcasts with guests from around the world, in addition to our regular weekly podcast. Now, last Friday's webcast was a bit different. And if you watched it live, relax. We have something much better to share with you. You see, schedule conflicts and summer vacations meant that we were not able to get a guest scheduled for last Friday. First time that's ever happened. So we turned it into an Ask Mark Anything forum. Our good friend Chris Ratcliffe jumped on to help out, along with my daughter Tessa and her boyfriend Matt, and thanks to all of you who sent in your questions. We had a lot of fun, talked about everything from whiskey and motorsports to sharing a whole lot of dad jokes. And if you really want to watch it, it's available to view at our YouTube channel. Instead, I went back into our webcast archives. Back on February 12th of this year, Scotch Whisky legend Jim McEwan joined us on the webcast, just a few weeks before he announced his retirement from the whiskey industry. He shared stories and answered your questions for almost 2 full hours, and it was one of the final interviews he did before his retirement. As a reminder, the streaming platform we use to produce the webcasts each week places a higher priority on video quality than it does audio. So there are occasional glitches from time to time, but this is exactly as the webcast went out on the internet that day. Thanks to our presenting sponsors, Redbreast and Dewar's, for making the podcast versions of these webcasts possible, along with our segment sponsors on the podcast each week, Oban, Sagamore Spirit, and Writer's Tears. We did start the webcast off on a somber note, though, since it was the day after Brett Ferenz, a good friend to many whiskey lovers around the world, died from pancreatic cancer. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Friday Happy Hour webcast from whiskycast.com. I'm Mark Gillespie, and we are dedicating today's show to the memory of our pal, the Scotch trooper, Brett Ferenz, who lost his battle with pancreatic cancer last night. Sláinte, Brett. I don't know if you saw the tease for this on Twitter a few minutes ago, but I am sipping from the Highland Park Valkyrie tonight. And even though we'll be talking with Jim McEwan, one of the whiskey's Lords of the Isles, if you want to call him that, in just a few minutes, this bottle has some significance because it came from the 2017 press trip just about 4 years ago in a month or so that Brett and I were on when the Viking Legends series was introduced in Denmark. And I want to read for you what's printed on the back of this. Valkyrie is the first in a series of 3 special Viking Legend releases. For Viking warriors, death was not an end, but a glorious beginning, and it began with the Valkyries. And of course, Valhalla was, in Viking mythology, what we would refer to today as heaven in the Christian faith. It was where noble and brave warriors would go when they died and be ushered in by the Valkyries singing their praises. And Brett certainly fits the category of a modern-day noble person, and the way he fought cancer over the last few months, he certainly was a warrior. So, Brett, we will not forget you, and the Whiskey Fabric will be there for your family. We do have details on the memorial service now for Brett, and if you are interested, it is going to be live streamed tomorrow morning at 11:30 Eastern Time at https://dogwood.church/celebrations. It will be live streamed. I know Brett had a lot of friends around the world, so we do have the details on that were just released by his family this afternoon. So that said, Brett would not want us to mourn. Anybody who has the guts to name his cancer Jar Jar after the most hated character in the Star Wars pantheon certainly has a sense of humor. So we will try to carry on as Brett would have us do. So once again, Sláinte, my friend, rest well. Now to the guest that I wanted to do and wanted to bring in for a long time now, our pal Jim McEwan, part of the Water of Life documentary film, more than 50 years in the Scotch whisky industry on Islay. And I don't think, Jim, tell me if I'm wrong, is there anybody that has actually spent more time, their entire career, that long working at distilleries on Islay than you have?
No, definitely not. Most people, as you know, retire a bit earlier now. The retirement age is generally about 65, but some people retire at 62. And I'm now 72, so this is me been in this game for 57 years.
What have you been up to these days besides becoming a movie star?
I'm still waiting to get paid. It's ridiculous, Well, during my time at Bruichladdich, I was fortunate enough to be able to buy some casks at a reasonable price. And so I built up quite a nice little stack of barrels, and mainly American oak. I'm a big fan of American bourbon casks because the consistency is there all the time, whereas with the sherries, it's a hit and a miss sometimes. And so you must have good continuity, and I use some wine barrels. So I set up my own company called the Cask Whisperer, a rather unusual name. That came about because there was a group of tourists going through the warehouse one day, and when I take a sample in the warehouse, I would take the whiskey and I would talk to it, and I would say, "Wow, you look good, but you're just a bit young yet. I'm going to give you another 6 months." And this group of tourists were going by, and one guy said to the other, he said, "Hey, check this guy out. He's absolutely drunk. He's talking to the whiskey." So that's where the name, he thought I was off my head because I was talking to the glass, but I was generally talking to the spirit, and I was like, "Yeah, you're good, but you're not just ready. I'm going to give you a bit of time, Beautiful, but you're not ready." And this guy is looking at me and saying, "Hey, buddy, that guy's totally pissed out of his mind," but I wasn't pissed out of my mind. I was just talking to the cask. So that's the idea for the Cask Whisperer. And also my grandfather, John McEwan, who worked at Beaumont Distillery for a while. He spent most of his life in the Navy. He was a horse whisperer. He was one of the great horse whisperers on the island of Islay, and he was renowned for being able to calm horses down and show days and stuff like that. So I decided to call it the Cask Whisperer. Yeah, I quite like the name.
Greg Schwartz, who directed the Water of Life film, has jumped in with a comment here in our chat area. He says your check is in the mail, Jim, for the movie.
He's a lying bugger, so he is. He's been saying that for 2 years now. And not only that, is one of the meanest guys I've ever. He never bought me a drink, and all the time we've known him, which is pretty sad, But that's the way it is,
Well, documentary filmmakers don't have any money to buy drinks.
Oh, is that the reason? Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Sorry,
they're even poorer than podcasters, for crying out loud.
I don't believe that for a second. Looking at the whiskey that's behind you, I think you're doing all right. I can see a few bottles of Deers there. I think I can actually see. Do I see I see a lot of Deers, and I see, you've got a good selection there, mate. Yeah, well done.
Well, there's a Lagavulin, and all the Bruichladdich are right over here, just off to my left.
Yeah, good.
Including the stuff, this is the 26-year-old, the Black Art 94 8.1. We can talk about Black Art in a little bit here, but so what are you going to do with these casks?
Well, I've got my own company, as I say, called the Cask Whisperer, and I bottle them up and I sell the contents. I've got a couple of partners who do the selling for me, and it's a good pension plan. And it keeps me interested because I'm always interested in whiskey anyway. It never leaves you, as you know. I mean, you've got the same disease that I have. We're tied to the still. So it keeps me going. I do a bit of travelling and a bit of teaching and that sort of stuff. I went down to Australia 2 years ago, got a distillery going down there, made a beautiful single malt and made some gin in the rainforest, which was spectacular. The gin is called Brookies Gin because the family were called the Brooks family, and that was a great experience for me. I also got stuck into helping the guys at Ardnahoe Distillery, the new distillery in Islay. I was involved in that, particularly the design of the stills. I wanted it to be something different. So I spoke to the coppersmiths and I said, I want to have the longest line arms in the world. And I spoke to the family about it. We all have to have a point of difference, you know. And I want to use traditional warren tubs rather than the normal tube condensers. So they agreed, the family agreed, the Lynn family, Stuart and the boys. And so we built beautiful stills from the space side. The line arm was phenomenal. Going into the warren tub, it's the only warren tub in operation in Islay. And obviously I was a bit wary. Would it work or would it not? But it was absolutely perfect. And so I'm busy all the time, Mark, really. There's always somebody on the phone. There's guys like yourself always having a chat with me. And so, yeah, I'm on the go all the time. Life is like
I remember when we talked in 2015 when you retired from Bruichladdich and then you came out of retirement to work at Ardnahoe, and you said you were pacing around the house like a cage. What are you doing during COVID, for crying out loud?
Well, I'm doing a lot of Zoom tastings, which are quite good. Some of them are a pain in the backside. It just depends on who the host is and what they're doing. But so far, it's been pretty good. It's a great medium to go out and talk to people because it's, you know, whiskey fans have been very loyal to us. So the least we can do as whiskey makers is to respect that loyalty, you know. And there's probably more single malt being consumed during COVID than any other time in the history of Scotland. Because everybody, one thing in a time of trouble, as you well know, the first thing you need is a Scotch, preferably a single malt from Islay. So, yeah, it's been busy actually. It's been really, really busy doing Zooms. So, thoroughly enjoying it. I just do the ones I want. I get lots of requests. So you're very, very fortunate that I chose you because you still owe me money for about 5 years ago. But don't worry about it.
Wait a second. For what? What do I owe you money for? I don't remember losing a bet.
I was trying to get you out of a strip club in New York, remember?
No. I can pretty much guarantee that didn't happen. I'm going to tell Barbara on you.
I'm really worried. So how is life for you?
Life's been great. We have been able to stay healthy so far. It has been an experience. But when you work from home for the last 10 years or so, it really hasn't been that big a difference.
Yeah.
We added these webcasts because we could and because there was a demand for it. But we're just keeping busy here. I want to check with you. You talk about putting worm tubs in at Ardnahoe. For a lot of folks who don't know what a worm tub is, and those who have toured distilleries and only see the shell and tube condensers, correct. Explain just what the worm tub is and how it affects the whiskey as it's coming off the still, what the differences are.
Well, as you can imagine, it's a long copper pipe which is curved in like a snake, like a worm, inside a vat that's filled with cold water, and the water's running through all the time. So as the vapour comes down from the condenser, it runs along the line arm, it gets to the large vat of cold water in which the worm is contained. And as the vapour goes round the worm, it cools down and comes back into liquid form. It's the old way of cooling. This is before the shell and tube condenser. And it worked a treat. I was a bit anxious about it at first, but it worked beautifully. It really, really did. So that's why it's just gone back in time. And I think in this case, you weren't able to distill just as fast. You had to cut back the distillation just a little bit so the worm tub could keep up with it. You know, you don't want to force it down there. You've got to get the temperature coming out right. So it worked a treat. And the owners of the distillery, Stuart, Lynn and the boys, they were well pleased with us. And I was delighted. It's the first time I'd ever designed and working with a designer and used it, and absolutely thrilled with the result. The spirit was great, really coming out nice and cold. That's what you want. It was just perfect, you know.
How soon do you think they'll be ready to bottle? I know you're not working with them full time anymore, but how soon do you think it'll be before we see an Ardnahoe bottling?
Well, they've sold quite a lot of casks as a fundraiser, and I would imagine that some of the people who bought the casks will go early. And but I reckon I think you could be expecting some bottlings fairly soon, I would think. Certainly, yeah, I would think maybe with the summer of this year you might see some bottlings, but that's a question for them to answer. I don't know what their strategy is and what they're thinking. You can only sell it once. If you sell it at 3 years old, you can't sell it at 6, and you can't sell it at 10, you know. So it's very much dependent upon the financial situation. So if you've got to sell some 3-year-old, that's a pity, because that could have been a brilliant 10-year-old. So that's their decision. My job was just to get the whiskey made and help with the design and walk away. And that's what I do. I don't want to be tied to anybody ever again. I mean, I've been in the game a long time. But a great team to work with at Ardnahoe, fabulous distillers there. They're all lovely, lovely people, as are the Lynn family. They were a joy to work with. So it's been a really good experience. Having worked in, you know, at Beaumont and at Bruichladdich and doing, you know, making at Bruichladdich, I did the double distillation, triple distillation. We did quadruple distillation. People said you can't do that. Well, we've just done it, you know. That was really scary stuff, going for a 4th distillation. That was
a whopper.
Oh, but the purity. Can you imagine how pure it was in the copper content for 4 distillates? And it was just phenomenal. I remember the strength, watching the strength in the hydrometer going up. And it's getting higher and higher, and I've got the Stillman with me. And we get to about 89%. I mean, it's huge, the strength that's in it. And the still started to shake, you know, and I thought, shit, here we go. This is Islay's first space launch. And I said to the Stillman who was with me, I said, get the hose quick. And if the still explodes, try and save my life. Hit me with the water, you know. I was just joking. But next minute he's back and he's holding this hose about 2 feet away from me, you know, just in case we get enveloped in vapor, you know. So, yeah.
Was this Budgie?
That was Budgie, yeah. Well, you know Budgie well, do you?
Yeah.
He's a legend, a nice guy. Good stillman, great stillman. Not good, he's a great stillman. So, yeah. The good thing about Bruichladdich was I was able to do things that when you're working in a small independent company that you couldn't do with a multinational company like Beaumont, which is, you know. So that was a great, and we made a great gin called The Botanist. You may have heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a lot of freedom there, and that was great. I really, really enjoyed Bruichladdich. I had a love affair with Bruichladdich from way, way back. When I was a cooper, a trainee cooper, about 18 years of age, I used to get phone calls from Bruichladdich. And at that time, the empty barrels were coming onto the island, not by a ferry inside 40-foot containers. They were coming off as loose barrels. And what they would do, they put half a dozen empty barrels into a net, swing it over the side of the ship, and drop it onto the harbour at Bruichladdich. And of course, as the day went on, the guy in the crane got drunker and drunker, and he'd be dropping the barrels from maybe 6 feet, you know what I mean? And the ends would get damaged and the staves would get broken. So I used to go to Bruichladdich and fix the casks. And I fell in love with Bruichladdich at that point. It was so old-fashioned, and everybody spoke Gaelic, the native language, and it was just a great, great whiskey. And it was just a joy. So I knew Bruichladdich from way back. And when Bruichladdich shut, that was a tragedy. Well, all the distilleries shut. You remember that, the days when they were all shutting down. And certainly when Bruichladdich shut, it was a disaster for that part of the island, because that was the main employer. So, you know, everybody lost their jobs and some people moved away and stuff like that. So I remember walking back through the gates of Bruichladdich in 2000 just to have a look at it. And I was shocked by what I met. The place was falling apart. There was birds flying through the buildings. The stills were covered in all sorts of shit. It was just a mess. But there was just something about it that had this beating heart. I could feel it. And I thought, yeah, we can take Cinderella to the ball, definitely. Because people used to say to me, ignorant people would say to me, yeah, but Bruichladdich not a true Islay because it's not peated. Excuse me? I'm going to give you Octomore and that'll shut you up forever. And that stopped the chattering monkeys. You know, you can't do that, Jim. I'm sorry, we've just done it. So it was great. The freedom I had at Bruichladdich was unbelievable. We made Port Charlotte 40 parts per million. We made Octomore about 90 parts per million. Can't do it, just done it. So it was fantastic. It was like every day was Christmas. And we hadn't got a pot to piss in either. We had no money. But that's the way, the checks in the post, that was the call. I'm sure you did. So that was a great move. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
We have some questions coming in right now from some of our audience around the world. Dave Kuhn wants to know if you feel you were always creating more refined whiskeys, or after a certain level of experience, does each whiskey simply capture a moment in time unique to itself?
Not particularly, no. It's the spirit, the new spirit you're making is consistent. It's got to be consistent every day of the week, every year. I always regarded the spirit as being the child and the cask as the mother. If the child goes to a mother who has no milk, the child dies. If the spirit goes to a cask that's been filled 3 or 4 times, it ain't going to do anything. You're just wasting time. That's particularly important if you're not using artificial colouring. You know what I mean? If you put it into a barrel that's been filled 4 times, you're not going to get colour, you're not going to get flavour, so then people will add artificial colouring, E150. So that was something I was dead against, and so were the rest of the board. We will never, ever do that. We will always buy the best casks. And that's what we did. So as I say, the spirit is the child and the cask is the mother. If the mother has no milk, the child dies. And it's the same with the whiskey in a barrel that's been filled 3 or 4 times. The oak has got nothing to give. You are just wasting time and wasting good spirit, which is a real shame. That's my philosophy.
Our next question comes from Chris Ratcliffe. Referring back to Ardnahoe, when you do a consulting project, is it an opportunity for you to make a whiskey as you would like to make it, or do you start with a concept and flavor profile from the customer?
Well, you discuss it with the customer. Obviously, I mean, whether you make a peated malt or a non-peated malt, or you can actually do both. You know, Bruichladdich, we were doing Bruichladdich, we were doing Port Charlotte, we were doing Octomore. Bruichladdich, no peating level, Port Charlotte 40 parts per million, and Octomore up about 90 parts per million. In a distillery, you don't have to make the same stuff all the time. People thought you had to do that, but we've changed that. You just change the malt, just change the peating level in the malt, and it gives you another point of sale. At the end of the day, you've got to generate money to pay the wages and rebuild the distillery and all that sort of stuff. And the number of times people said to me, Bruichladdich can't make peated malt. Oh, really? It can't make peated malt. So I made Octomore, and that stopped the monkeys chattering, you know.
We got to keep those monkeys quiet now. But Tyrone Coty has a good question. We just reported this week on Elixir Distillers getting permission from the council to build its distillery just east of Port Ellen. When the Port Ellen project from Diageo reopens and this one is built, that'll make 11 distilleries on Islay. What do you think the pros and cons are of having so many distilleries on such a small island?
It's hard to say, because if you take the situation just now where you've got COVID, something that we never thought would happen, you know, that is devastating. And I think there is enough single malt distilleries in Scotland just now to supply the world demand. And I think another distillery in Islay, is it necessary? Well, it's not for me to criticise somebody else who's going to provide work on Islay. And I won't do that. That's one of the unwritten laws in the whisky world. You never criticise anybody, because you never know when you're going to need them. So we'll see how it goes. Time will tell, and the quality of the spirit will tell. So that's how I see it. Good luck to you.
Yeah, when I got an email today. I've been trying to reach out to the folks on the Islay Community Council because they had raised some objections, and I know that Sukhinder and Raj Singh at Elixir Distillers had doubled the number of houses they were going to build as part of this project for distillery workers, and we're really trying to work with the community. How much you live there, and you've lived there your entire life, how much of a demand do the distilleries put on the infrastructure?
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. I mean, the modern... today, a person working in a distillery is earning a very good salary. You know, they're getting really, really good salaries. They've got good health programs and all that sort of stuff. So there's more and more young people building their own houses. It's just quite amazing, which is great. And another distillery in Ireland, do I think we need it? I would say I'm not sure because I don't really know. It depends on it. Time will tell. If it's good, it will sell. If it's not good, it will not sell. It's as simple as that. So it's all down to the quality of distillery. You can build anything. You can build 10 distilleries. But if they're producing, just think of where the bar is just now. You think the Lagavulins, the Lafroigs, the Arbegs, the Bunnahabhain. That's where the bar is set. And it's going to be 10 years before that distillery even comes close to giving us a real feel of what its character is like. So you're going into the first division here. You're not playing away from home in a fourth division. You're in the first division Islay here. So it's got to be bloody good. It's got to be something better to coax in the new consumer to this new product, or a consumer to an Islay, because Islay is definitely, it's so unique in its flavour. I can't comment as to the infrastructure distillery. The modern distillery will employ about, 8, 10 people max. When I started in Belmore Distillery, there was 32 people working there. You're turning the malt by hand and everything was done by hand. But a modern distillery now will employ about 8 people. Do we need it? I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think there's plenty of whiskey coming out of Islay, and I just don't know what the USP will be. What's going to be their unique selling point? Is it going to be peated? Well, we've got Octomore, the most heavy peated in the world. You've got Lafroig, Ardbeg, and you've got Bruichladdich, which is non-peated. So I don't know where they're going to plant their flags. If it's another peated malt, it's going to be difficult to beat what's in the marketplace right now. Why would you want to buy it? But anyway, good luck to them. It's not for me to criticise them at all. But I don't think there's a shortage of Islay malts in the world just now. And I don't see the consumption of single malt from Islay increasing that dramatically that we need another distillery, because not all the distilleries are going flat out. I mean, they're working probably at 80%. So there is spare capacity in Islay, you know what I mean? But good luck
now,
to them.
We had the question from Chris Ratcliffe on this similar point. What was the island like at its lowest point with the least number of open distilleries? Back when, say, Ardbeg was closed and some of the other, and Bruichladdich was closed, and we didn't have Kilchoman or Ardnahoe. What was it like back, say, 20 years ago before Bruichladdich opened up? We should note Bruichladdich is celebrating the 20th anniversary of the revival this year.
Yeah, it was really tough. There wasn't a lot of money about, and the fact of the matter is, when these distilleries, the ones that had remained open, they were only producing maybe about 50% of their actual capacity. So it was a tough period for the people in Ireland, because people were laid off, jobs were laid off, and distilleries closed down. And if you take the Bruichladdich, for example, when Bruichladdich closed, the local school closes, the doctor's surgery closes. The effects are far-reaching, and people become disillusioned, and it was really, really hard, because some of these companies were multinational companies, and they chose to shut down the Islay ones. Part of that reason, you might not believe it, was because Islay made heavy peated malt, smoky malt, and the consumer was not used to heavy peated malt. They liked the Speyside, that easy taste. So it took years and years of coaxing with guys like myself on the road day after day, talking about peated whiskey. And now everybody loves peated whiskey. But it was a really difficult time. So much unemployment, a population of 4,000, of which probably about 1,800 are working people. But not all at distilleries, obviously. But it was a really, really bad time. It was terrible, really terrible. And of course, some of the distilleries fell into disrepair, like Bruichladdich. I remember walking through the gates of Bruichladdich the first time when I went to join them. And I was totally shocked by the condition of the distillery. There was holes in the roof, there was birds flying in, the place was just a shambles. And I remember walking through the gates and saying to myself, Jim, you have just made the biggest mistake of your life. This is a bomb site. But there was 2 old guys there who had been kept on to look after the casks in the warehouse. And they made me very welcome. They made me a cup of tea in the little bothy. And I sat down and I spoke to these 2 gentlemen for about an hour. And I knew within 20 minutes that we could do it. The passion and the integrity and the honesty and that these guys were giving me, it was like, Christ, if everybody thinks like you and the team come back, we can do anything. And that's what happened. Slowly but surely, there was a knock on the door, and this guy came. He says, "Hello, Mike. My name's Peter. I used to be the stillman here. Any chance of my job back?" I said, "You can start now, right now." And it was just absolutely, they all came back. It was just, they had different jobs now, but they wanted to go back to making whiskey, which was fantastic. So I wasn't hiring a group of young people who didn't know how to distill. It was the old distillers coming back, and it was just magical. The pride of stills got all polished up, and it was just fantastic. And Bruichladdich became a beacon of hope, I think, for that part of Islay, the west coast of Islay, because it was the main employer. And now at Bruichladdich, when I started, there was myself, 2 men, and a dog named Boo. Today, there's over 80 people working at Bruichladdich, the biggest employer on the west coast, which is quite amazing, quite amazing. And it's all done with the same equipment that was there when I started there at the very beginning, 2000.
I'm betting one of those 2 guys that welcomed you in was Duncan, right?
Yeah. Duncan McGuire was, without doubt, definitely without doubt, the nicest guy I have ever met in my life. An absolute gentleman, a genius engineer. Duncan could fix anything. When he left the distillery, he was engineering farm equipment. He could fix everything from a pot still to a hay baler. You know, he had that talent. But his real talent was he was never a man in a hurry. He was a gentleman, a really mean gentleman. I never heard the man swear once in his life. Never did he swear. And many's the time he had a reason. He was a genius engineer. We didn't have much money, but with Duncan there, he's the man that got it going. Truly one of the greatest distillers ever in Scotland. I would put him down there. And also one of the nicest, most generous, kind-hearted people ever. He was a one-off. And I think the spirit we made at Bruichladdich clearly mirrors Duncan's character. It was pure. It was gentle, and Duncan was pure and gentle. A massive work ethic. Fabulous guy. I could never have done anything at Bruichladdich without Duncan fixing all the boilers and fixing the mash tun when it was creaking and leaking stills and all that stuff. He would just say, "No problem, Jim, I'll get it sorted." Shit. An hour later, he says, "That's the still back on. You can carry on." I couldn't fix a bloody tap. My game was not engineering, you know. My game was distilling. No, he was a very, very sad loss to the island. And never forgotten. A hero. An absolute hero.
Amen. He was just one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Graham Fraser had the same experience that Mark Rainier had that first time he showed up, that he's talked about, taking the tour and being told essentially where to go. He got the owner's permission to look around the derelict distillery, and Graham turned up and Budgie told him where to go. I think Budgie was the same one that told Mark where to go as well, right?
Well done, Budgie. Budgie's a one-off. You've got to understand that. He's a legend. One of the best stillmen in Scotland, for sure. He doesn't need to look at the hydrometer. He just feels the side of the still and he knows when it's coming to the boil. You know, the hydrometer's fine, but she's coming forward. Just running his hand over the still. She'll be coming in soon, Jim. She'll be coming in soon. Sure enough, a little drops have come in. Budgie, I've never heard Budgie swear in my life. Never, ever. A quiet, gentle man. Deep as the ocean, you know. He comes from a crofting family, so when you come from a crofting family, you are working from the age of 5. You're not sitting watching television, you know. So Budgie came from a crofting family, born with the soil, and he's still.
You and Mark Rainier took care of all the swearing for all those guys, right?
I didn't swear at all. It was all Mark. I was a gentleman. I never swore. No, Mark.
Tell me about the first time you met Mark Rainier.
I was very impressed with him, yeah. He had a dynamism about him. You know, he knew what he wanted to do. And
for a while,
hell or high water would not stop him. And I didn't come to Bruichladdich because of Mark Rainier. I went to Bruichladdich because I was breaking my heart standing at Beaumont when I was a manager. I'm looking across the loch at Bruichladdich, and we never saw the black smoke, you know. And I'm thinking, someday, somebody's got to take Cinderella to the ball. And so I was contacted by Sir John McTaggart, who was the chairman of the company, and he said, I never met the gentleman. He owns a large part of Islay, and fabulous man. So I got a phone call. I was managing Bowmore at the time, and this was Sir John McTaggart. And he said, hi, Jim. I said, this is Sir John McTaggart. He said, I don't think we've met. I said, no, sir, we haven't had the pleasure. And he said, well, I'll come straight to the point. He said, we're buying Bruichladdich Distillery, and would you consider coming down and making a whiskey for us? And he said, take your time and think about it. I said, no, I'm coming. It took me 3 seconds to answer that question. 3 seconds. It was just so sad to see Bruichladdich falling apart, having known it as a young cooper, you know, and what had happened to the school and the economy of that part of the town, at that part of the island. I didn't even discuss it with Barbara. I said, yeah, I'm your man. Let me know when. I had some regrets at leaving Bowmore, but I feel I'd given Bowmore a large part of my life. I was there from the age of 15, you know. So, and Bowmore was in good shape. Suntory owned it. Money was not a problem. And they were great. I remember when Suntory bought the company, I was managing at the time, and they said, Jim, just tell us what you need and just go and get it. So the budget was enormous. So it was fantastic. So great respect for Suntory.
And it's been pointed out, Tyrone Cote points this out, your daughter is still at Bruichladdich. Lynn is still working there, right?
Yeah, she's got the same passion as me. Yeah, she's brought up, you know, she spent, every day she came down from the high school at Bowmore, she didn't go home. She would come into the distillery because the distillery is right beside the school, as you know. It's about 200 metres away. So she would come down the school street, turn left into the distillery and say, hi, Dad, can I come round with you? And when I was doing my rounds, she would come round with me. So from the age of about 12, she was wandering around distilleries, and she just got the bug. And I'm very, very proud of her. She's done extremely well, you know. She's got a good nose and a good palate, but she's got the passion, you understand? You can have all the talents in the world. You can have the best nose or the best engineer, but if you haven't got the passion, you're just totally wasting. You're passing time. You're wasting time. And Lynn has the passion. She gets very passionate about it, which is good. I don't know where she gets it from. It's not from me. It's from her mother, I think, you know.
And Barbara's sitting just off the camera, right?
No, Barbara next to it. Barbara will not listen to me. She gets embarrassed. She'd always say, Jim, you can't say that. I said, I've just done it. I've just said it. What's the point of an interview if you can't speak what's in your mind? Get it out, you know, and try not to be offensive to anyone.
Speaking of this, Michael Darazinski raises a question that I was about to ask you about. I hear tell that there may be a book in your near-term future. I hear that you're working on a book, right?
Yeah, I've done a book with a German publisher, and it's called, I've given it the title, A Journeyman's Journey. You understand? A Journeyman's Journey. Just a simple guy, a journeyman who's learned his craft. I was a cooper, did all that sort of stuff. So it's my journey. I'm as a journeyman. So it's my journey, journeyman's journey. And I found it extremely difficult, really, really difficult. I found it very emotional because a lot of the people I was writing about are no longer with us, you know. But I enjoyed doing it, and I hope it paints a good picture of the world of distillation, because on Islay we all help each other, all the distillers. If you've got a breakdown, you just phone another distillery and they'll come and help you. And there's no rivalry on the island. We're all just glad, but we've all got good jobs. And there's a lot of kidding. You know, when you get into a company with some of the guys from other distilleries, it's absolutely, the quality of the abuse you get is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's really quality abuse, you know. Are you still making that horrible stuff down there? You know what I mean? It's that sort of stuff. They're just taking the piss, you know. But it's good fun.
Yeah, there's a question here that I just, on that very topic point, I'm just trying to find it here. because I wasn't going to bring it up until you did, but just a second here because, the timing on this is wrong, but I believe it was, so I'll just keep trying to find it here and we'll just go on. But when will the book be out?
Well, it's been published first in German. The German company that signed me up, and they seem to be quite happy with the story. And as I say, I found it extremely emotional, but I didn't hold back. You know what I mean? I spoke about the good moments and the not so good moments and the happiness and the sadness and travelling the world. I mean, I went around the world for 8 years non-stop, trying to educate the world about peated malt. I mean, I remember going into all these countries and never trying. The people there, it was incredible. They thought there was something wrong with the whiskey, you know. When I was working for Bowmore, they thought there's some, you know, particularly in Asia, that peat seemed like a dirty flavour to them. I use the word dirty loosely. And so it was all about education, and it was a fantastic. The travels around the world were amazing. I met some incredible people, and to be given the opportunity to educate something that is so big in your life is an absolute honour. It's a gift. Not many people will ever get that in a lifetime, or indeed 10 lifetimes. I was very lucky. I was more than happy to tell them about Islay, not just about Bowmore, tell them about Lafroig and Lagavulin and Bunnahabhain and a whole lot. So my job was to promote Islay and its whiskies, and slowly but surely people caught on to it. This is a different style of whiskey. Everybody was used to drinking Johnny Walker Black Label, so the single malt was a big step. But a single malt to Islay was like Bob Beamon in a long jump. I mean, it's wow, what's the subject? I remember in Korea, Jesus, I thought it was trying to poison him, you know. But persevered, and there's 1,000 stories about educating people around the world, particularly through interpreters. It's really difficult when you're working through with a Scottish accent. For example, in Japan, the interpreters are all educated in American English. So I remember I was teaching the Suntory cruise. So I was working for Suntory at that point. I was on the road, and I remember Suntory brought all the brand ambassadors into their own fabulous theatre in Tokyo. And there's cameras on me, this way, that way, that way. And my translator, she spoke American English, and I'm speaking Scottish, Islay. Bloody disaster, you know. She couldn't understand half of what I was saying. But anyway, it was really quite funny. I remember teaching them how to taste whiskey. And so everybody's got a line of whiskies, right? And there's maybe about 150, 200 people there. It's all like a theatre. There's a big screen behind you. There's screens on each side of you. And the translator is doing the translation. And I very quickly learned how to work with translators, because they take everything literally that you say. So you can't say anything that you don't mean. And I remember standing there, and rows and rows and rows of these Suntory employees. And they've all got the whiskies there, and my interpreters beside me. A very attractive girl, very intelligent. And I picked up my glass, for example, and I said, you pick up the glass, try and use a glass with a stem if you can. Saves your fingerprints going onto the glass, and the glass looks good. I said, take the whiskey, but don't just drink it straight away. Just hold it about that distance below your nose. You understand? That distance. Don't put your nose into the glass, or your eyes will fall out. And she says, oh, no, Jim Stan, glass, no, eyes fall out. So I look up, and there's 150 Japanese people shutting their eyes and smelling their own finger. And I thought, Jim, you made a right mess of that one. She translated literally. So there you look up, and they're all standing there, eyes closed, smelling their own finger. I'm thinking, shit, you got to learn fast, Jim, you know. So I was really, and you can't work out of that. You can't say, no, take the finger away, you know. So There must be hundreds of people in Japan still smelling their own finger, but hey, who cares?
You talked about taking the piss out of each other. Dave Kuhn wants to know, what's your least favorite Islay malt and why is it Lafroig? He said with a wink. He also noted later he was just kidding, but...
well, I respect that from a guy named Dave, There are no least favourite whiskies. As a blender for many years, part of my job was nosing whiskey. I trained in Glasgow for 2 years on my nose and my palate. So every day the trucks would come in from Speyside or from Islay or the Lowlands, but generally Speyside and all that. And my job was standing on the deck, and when the trucks came in, they would reverse in, and there was a fleet of trucks coming in. This is in Bridgeton, in Glasgow. We were doing blends. We're all over the world. And for months I stood in that dock, and the barrels would come off, put into the warehouse. I would check them in, and then the bungs had to be taken out of every cask, and I would nose every cask to pick out that not all whiskies are equal. The whiskies are equal, but not all the casks are equal. You could have the same whiskey in 3 different casks, and you might get a different flavour because the third one was being filled for 3 times, the second had been filled for 2 times, and the first one's a first fill. So you've got to try and grade them, because you don't want to be putting the best into a cheap blend. You understand? You keep the best. If you were doing a blend that was maybe 60% malt, 60% grain and 40% malt, you really need good malts in that. Whereas if you're doing a Tom and Jerry blend for, I don't know, Wagga Wagga, and they're looking for 97% grain and 3% malt, it's just a joke. But some people do that. So I would stand in that dock, and the guy would say to guys, pull out the bang, and I would nose it, smell it, have a look at it, and I would score it. First, second, or third. Thirds always went to cheap blends. Some of the seconds as well, and first and second went to the good blends, the more expensive. So I spent literally years just standing with my nose in a glass on a cold dock. So it was good training. And so I learned very quickly how to make up blends, which was good.
Chris Ratcliffe was just asking if you got to ever try your hand as a blender. And of course, because you were blending all these whiskeys that Bruichladdich was coming out with 20 years ago, like the old WMDs and the yellow subs and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
As well as black art.
Well, the question is, did Jim ever try his hand as a blender? Yeah, I became a chief blender. I trained in Bridgeton in Glasgow, which is a tough part of Glasgow. It's where the old razor slashers used to come from. It was a tough crew, but I enjoyed it. The fact that I was a cooper and trained at Beaumont, there was a cooperage there. And so when I went there at first, I think the people, there's a big team there, and they're real hard East End Glasgow folk. I mean, you're talking seriously hard men. And here's me from Islay, and being a polite guy and all that. And very quickly I had to learn to toughen up a little bit and not take any crap from anyone. But I was very, very fortunate. I was also in charge of the cooperage. There was a cooperage there, and having been a former cooper, they welcomed me like a brother. So I was looking after the cooperage and training as a blender. So that was quite good in that respect. So I made good friends with the coopers, and they gave me a certain amount of protection, and they were tough guys, and anybody who was messing me about, they would sort them out. But that was what it was like, just standing in the dock every day, truck after truck, nosing it. It's a first, it's a second, and it's a third. It's a third, and very quickly you're doing it blindfolded because you know what you're doing. But it's always good to look at the cask. If you look at a cask and the cask looks really pure, it's been filled a few times. Just by the visual of the actual cask itself, you get a rough idea of what the whiskey is going to be like. You say, oh shit, this is a third fill hogshead. This is not going to be too good because it's probably been filled for 30 years, maybe twice at 15 years or even 25 years. So you become very tuned into the appearance of the cask before you even open the bung. And you just, it was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And that's where you get a nose, just doing it every bloody day,
You mentioned the book and telling stories of some of the people that have passed on. Peter Polkert wants to know, and I've had a couple people email me this question ahead of time, Who are the people that you consider heroes and legends that you respected growing up in the industry?
Well, at Bowmore Distillery, the man who started me when I remember going to his door, his name was James McEwan. He was the distillery manager. And I knocked on his door. I had just turned 15. And I knocked on his door and I said, he knew me because he knows everybody in the village. James has passed on. He had the same birthday as me, coincidentally. He was an absolute gentleman. And he said, I said, any chance of a job at the distillery? And I've been at the distillery since I was knee-high to a grasshopper because you're in sweeping floors and all that sort of shit. And he said, well, we'll give you a trial. We'll give you a trial for a month, see if you make it. And here I am. 57 years later, I'm still in trial. But he was a great man. I looked up to him. He was one of my heroes. The man never swore in his life. He was just a great, great guy. And, of course, my teacher, the late, great David Bell, he was a man who had been in the trenches with the Black Watch Regiment who were based in Glasgow. He was in the trenches in France. So he had seen death in a large scale and survived. That's what you're talking about, real heroes, you know. And he, strange enough, the Coopers Union was very, very strong at that point. You had to have like 5 coopers working for one apprentice, and by doing so, the Coopers Union kept the number of coopers down, which meant they could demand very high salaries. You understand how that works? If there's a shortage of coopers, you get paid big money. And it had always been my dream to be a cooper, but there was only 3 coopers working at Bowmore Distillery at that time, and you had to have 5 coopers for one apprentice. However, as it turned out, my late mother, was the office cleaner for the only solicitor on the island. And I used to go in. I came from a very humble background, you know. So I used to go into the office when my mum was cleaning on the way home from work at night. And I would help my mum to clean the offices and before we went home together for dinner. And this particular day, the lawyer said, Jim, you're working in the distillery now. I said, yeah, I'm doing all right. He said, you enjoying it? I said, yeah, it's okay, but I really wanted to be a cooper, you know. That was my dream since I was a wee boy. I used to go and sit in the coopies in front of the fires. And he said, what's stopping you? And I said, well, the Coopers Union have a system where you must have 5 coopers working in the cooperage for one apprentice. The idea was to keep the numbers of coopers down. The union was keep the numbers low so they could demand high salaries. You get it? The fewer they are, the more valuable they are. And he said, well, that's a pity. And he said, that's what you want to do? I said, yeah, I really want to be a cooper. He said, okay. I never thought any more about it. And about 6 weeks later, my mum said, the lawyer wants to see you, the solicitor wants to see you. And I thought, shit, am I in trouble? Did I cause a ruckus somewhere? But no, I knew I hadn't. And I went down and he handed me this letter from the Coopers Union. And he, unbeknown to me, he had written to the Coopers Union and made a special plea for me, saying that this young lad is now on Violet, really, really keen in becoming a cask maker. But unfortunately, there's only 3 coopers in the cooperage, but one of them is the number 1 cooper in the world. He's the longest serving cooper in the world. When you become a cooper, you get a number. And if somebody retires out of the craft, it's not a trade, it's a craft. You know, this goes right back to the day the Egyptians made the first barrels. That's how they could travel around the world. I mean, the barrel is not a new invention, but what an invention that was. And he had, unbeknown to me, he had written to the Coopers Union and made a special plea that I'd be given a dispensation. And he wrote back to the distillery and said it would be okay to give me an apprenticeship. And that was probably one of the greatest memories of my life. And I became apprentice to David Bell, who was the longest serving cooper in the world. And he was a hard but fair taskmaster. There was no buggering about with Davy. You did it once and you did it right. But he was never a bully, you understand? And him and I became great friends. And he lived to the right age of 90. And I remember going to see him on his deathbed. I was in Glasgow at the time. And my mum phoned me up and she said, your old pal is just about to go he hasn't got long to go. Davy was 92 at that age, swinging a hammer. He had been to war, he had lived life, and he never swore once in his life. Incredible. A gentleman. And my mum said, Davy's in his last leg, so I was blending in Glasgow at that time. So I flew home immediately, and I went to his little house in School Street, just opposite the distillery, and the family were all gathered round. The house was full because it's a small house. And the family said, "Oh, Jim, it's good. Thanks for coming, It means a lot to Dad, He hadn't just passed. This is just before he was dying. And I said, could I go in and have a chat with him? They said, well, he might recognise you and he might not, he's in a bad way. I said, well, I'd like to go and say goodbye to him, And so I went down to his little bedroom, and there he was, my hero, my teacher, the man who was everything to me. He taught me a lot about life and decency and manners and all that sort of stuff. And I'm trying to be happy for myself. I'm trying to be brave for myself because I don't want to say goodbye to this man. It's like, shit, this is not fair. But he was in his 90s, and he had survived the war. So I went down to his room, and he's lying there and he's just breathing his last. And I said, how's it going, Davy? He said, Jim, come close. I've got something to tell you, son. And I went down, and he said, Jim, I'm leaving tonight. And he said, I've left you a special gift. And that gift is in a secret place. And him and I had a secret place in his garden shed, where we used to hide the odd bottle of whiskey, which we were lucky enough to get from the warehouse. And that was the secret place, under the floorboards in his garden shed. And so he did pass that night, and I was there for the funeral, and it was so sad, but he had a good life. And a couple of days after the funeral, I went back to the house, and I said to his son, Alan, I said, Alan, your dad has left me a gift in the secret place. And he says, Jim, I know nothing about it. I said, I know, it's a secret. It's a secret with your dad and I. And your dad said to me, I've left you a gift that means you'll always have a penny in your pocket. You will always have a penny in your pocket. And I couldn't fathom this out. But this gift was in the secret place. So I took the son out to the garden shed, and underneath the floorboards, Davy and I had a secret place. And what he had done is, obviously sometime before, he had taken all the tools that a cooper required to make money, to make a job. And he had sharpened them like razors and wrapped them up in Hessian sackcloth, which had been soaked in linseed oil, so the rust of Islay, the salt in the air, wouldn't damage the tools. So I opened it up, and there were all the tools wrapped in Hessian sackcloth. I'm leaving you a gift that will make sure you've got a penny in your pocket. He left me his tools. Wow. I've received many gifts in my life, but that was the most poignant. It was just fantastic. So I was very lucky to be trained by a man of that quality. And foolishly, when I left Beaumont, I left the tools at Beaumont, and I should have taken them with me. So I regret that to this day, you know what I mean? But what a guy. And he didn't just teach me to be a cooper, he taught me how to be a decent fella, you know. I was a man who had been in the trenches, seen death and gassing and all that sort of stuff. So you never forget your teachers. I can assure you, if I asked you to name your teachers, you could still name most of your teachers. It's the one person in your life, apart from your family, who you remember. You remember the good teachers and the bad teachers and all that sort of stuff. They weren't bad, you just didn't particularly like them. So with a training, both as a cooper and a waresman and all that sort of stuff, I was very, very fortunate to have the late, great David Bell, the number one cooper in the world at that time. So for me, for a boy leaving school at 15, that was some honour. It was a massive honour. You know.
Gavin Thompson wants to know if you still go by Beaumont from time to time and just reminisce about the old times there. It's if you go into the town of Beaumont, it's kind of hard to miss the place because it's right on the corner of the main roads going through. So you can't really miss it. But you got to go there to go to the co-op and the grocery stores and everything. So
well,
how often do you go by there?
Well, you know the layout of Bowmore. You've been there many times. You've been in Main Street, Bowmore. Well, I was born in the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is now, you know where the Royal Bank is, opposite the Cove. So I'm like 100 metres from the distillery. So that's where I was born. But it wasn't a Royal Bank of Scotland. It was a building that held 4 families. So every day I was going to the school, I'd be looking through the malt barn windows, and you get the smell of the pipe. The men were smoking the pipe. You get the smell of whiskey off their breath, the smell of the sweat, and the green malt. It was just totally intoxicating. It was just like the Pied Piper. It was phenomenal. So I spent as much time in the distillery after school as, I was in there all the time. But it's characters. We meet so many people. Like you've met thousands and I've met thousands. I'm sure a lot of people watching this have met thousands. There's very, very few, you can count them in one hand, the people that really make the big impression on you. I'm not talking about relatives. I'm talking about people who've inspired you or you admire. You can count them in one hand. And David Bell was one of these people. So it was a great privilege to be trained by such a man. He didn't just teach me how to make barrels and look after whiskey in the cask and that. He taught me how to be a decent fella, because I was a tearaway, you can imagine. So he was great. I was very, very fortunate.
We've had this question asked a couple of times tonight, and I'm finally going to bring it up because, as Dave Kuhn points out, it's time. What is more important, the spirit or the wood?
What's the most important, the husband or the wife? I'm asking Dave. Dave, what's the most important thing, you or the wife? It's the combination together. The cask is so important. The consistency of the spirit is, without doubt, we've been doing it, Bowmore was like 1779. I think they know what they're doing, you know what I mean? And it's the same with Bruichladdich, 1881. The spirit is of that level. The cask, however, it's very hard to tell whether a cask has been filled once, filled twice, or filled 3 times. And that is a problem. If you don't, you can look at the cask and it looks fine, but it's been filled 3 times. There's nothing left in the oak inside, and only time will reveal that to you. But nowadays, it's much, much better because people are now paying attention to that. Is this a first fill, a second fill, or a third fill? And the quality of cask being used today in the maturation of single malt has never been higher, because you don't get third fill casks from maturing single malt anymore. They just don't do it. Like a cask, let's say it's been filled 3 times. It's filled for 20 years in the first fill, and it's been built for 15 years in the second fill. The cask is now 35 years old. And each year the whiskey goes in, as it expands with the heat. In the summertime, it contracts, and it's moving back and forward for 35 years in the second fill. There's not a lot left there. So the quality of cask today, in the old days they used to do some de-char, re-char, but as I say, one of the worst things is when people are using artificial colouring, because you could have a whiskey in a dud cask for 10 years and it comes out and it looks like coloured water. It's got nothing. But when you're using artificial colouring, you can make it look like a 20-year-old Oloroso with a bucket of colouring. So one thing that should be banned is the use of E150. That should be totally banned from all sorts of... The consumer deserves better. I know you have to get consistency. The consumer's not stupid. I'm talking about single malt particularly. Single malt should never, ever be artificially coloured with E150. The money should be spent in good casks, and it's happening. It's never been better. The quality of casks in Scotland now is of the highest order because it's easier to ship from America. In the old days, they used to come as loose cargo. Now they come in containers, 40-foot containers, straight out of Kentucky, and it's absolutely fabulous. American distiller can only use the cask once. That is a godsend to us Scots. If that ever changes, we're in trouble.
We've had a couple of folks that have asked whether you have any favorite bourbons, given your love for bourbon casks.
I don't drink much bourbon, to be honest. I like bourbon cask. I like the flavour it gives it. But if I have to choose one bourbon above all others, it would be Buffalo Trace. by a long way. I think it's a great spirit. I've been to the distillery. I was one of the highlights of my life. I went down there and met the guys and all that. And the quality of American oak is just outstanding. I just hope the forestation can keep up with the demand, because it's been under a lot of pressure. You can take the number of bars that have been filled now. I mean, bourbon's just flying, and it's a great, great drink. So we are totally dependent upon not so many sherry casks about just now, because very few people are drinking sherry. When did you last buy a bottle of sherry?
I've not ever bought one. I've been given a few, but I've never bought one.
Yeah. So,
I hear sherry sales are actually up because of the pandemic. People have actually been buying more sherry. We've seen sales of sherry going up, which is a good thing, I think.
I don't know what the connection is there, but I'm quite sure they'd rather get rid of the COVID than sell sherry. I'm not sure. But yeah, as I always say, the spirit's the child and the cask is the mother. And that's really, really important to give you that flavour consistency. And that's what the single malt boys are doing. It's really, really good.
The first time we met, back in 2005 or so, I asked a question and I used a word where you almost bit my head off. The F word.
That surprises me because I'm not a violent person.
Well, you almost bit it off because I used the F word, finishing. And you told me, no, we don't use that word. We use aced, added cask enhancement.
That's right. Finish is a negative.
Yeah, you bit my head off for that one. And I'm just curious because now almost everything we see has been aced in some way.
It's just an additional cask evolution. It's just a name that came into my head, Finish means the end. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a new life for the spirit, because it's going from a bourbon into a chateau, blah, blah, blah. Or it's going, and I like sherry. I really do like sherry. I love all the rows of sherry, and I like Fino as well. There's always bottles in the house. And I enjoy a glass of sherry. It's a great drink. And it's just a pity more people don't drink it. So, yeah.
Do you have any opinion on the STR casks that Jim Swan came up with before his passing, the shaved, toasted, and recharred wine casks that take some of the sweetness out but leave the character of the wine?
I've never actually come across. I'm a huge fan of Jim's, and I worked with Jim a lot, and we used to judge together at international wine and spirit competition. But I've never tasted spirit from these said casks, so I can't comment on that.
And I'm trying to find the question
if
here.
You're talking about dechar, rechar, these are great casks. Yeah, really. You just take it out inside. If it's flails that go inside it, and take all the old charcoal off, back to the wood, and then rechar it, perfect. Because the staves are thick. You can do a dechar, rechar. And because there's a lot of life left in the cask, and there's a lot of that bourbon that's seeped right in, it's going through the charcoal and it's deep in the oak, so it gives you a chance to get that residue of bourbon, that spiciness out of it. And it takes a lot of pressure off the oak, the forests down in bourbon country. And it depends as well how long has the cask been in use. Has it been filled in the first fill for 5 years, or has it been filled for 10 years? That's one thing. That should really be, there should be a barcode in every cask telling you when it was filled and emptied and filled and emptied. But there's so many casks, there's literally millions of casks that we have to track, but it shouldn't be that difficult. You should be able to put a tag on it when it was first filled, so you would get a history of each cask. But you can generally tell by the colour and the taste of the cask. So that's what the chief blenders do, or the guys do. But the quality has never been better, and the supply is just sensational. I love American aged bourbon casks.
We have a question now from Whiskey Throttle. Is it true that you went to school with James McTaggart, who is the longtime manager at Arran?
Yeah, well, I was James's boss at Bowmore. And yeah, I was a few years older than him. He would probably be in primary when I was in secondary school. I reckon he'll be about a good 5 years younger than me. So yeah, we went to the same school. We all went to Bowmore School, the high school and that sort of stuff. Yeah, and we played football together, and he was a really good footballer. A very, very tricky player. I was hopeless. I was just a cruncher. So I've known James. I became his boss, and he was a great stillman. James could do the mashing. He could do the distillation. He understood it. Very clever guy, very bright. very conscientious worker. If there's a problem, he wouldn't shy back and tell me what the problem was. In fact, I was talking to him just 2 days ago in the doctor's surgery, and we were talking about old times, and before the laughs we used to have, and all that sort of stuff. An absolute great distiller and a really, really nice person. Yeah. Good footballer, hopeless referee. He gave the decisions against me all the time, which I didn't like. But apart from that, yeah, I'm a big fan of James McTaggart. And he's a Bowmore boy, so it's one of us. It's like
question.
Carry on.
Ben Marnock is going to start some trouble here. Does Jim think Mark Rainier's the concept of terroir in whiskey is a thing? And I'll amplify that. Have you tried any of the Waterford whiskies that Mark and his team are producing over in Ireland yet?
I haven't. I haven't tried it at all, to be honest. But, Mark's coming from a wine background, and obviously the soil in France or Burgundy or Bordeaux or whatever it is, the soil is very, very important for the grape and all that. Does it affect the flavour here? Well, I would say he's absolutely right. I think the barley grown in Islay, because there's so much salt in the soil. I mean, we've got a hurricane coming in this week, and there's so many. Just look at any of the buildings in Islay; they're all falling apart from rust. There's so much salt. So the soil in Islay has been saturated for millennia since the Atlantic Ocean opened up, and we got a lot of storms because the next stop from us is America. There's nothing to break it, it bounces off the top of Ireland. So there's a lot of salt in the soil, and it definitely gets a completely different note to the spirit. It really does, that salty soil.
But some of the Islay whiskies don't have that saltiness character to them. I get it in some, but not all of them. Does it matter on which side of the island? For instance, if you're on the eastern side, over towards Ardbeg, you don't get as much.
Apart from ourselves and Kilchoman, the other distilleries are bringing the barley in from the mainland. There's only 2 distilleries on the island using Islay-grown barley. You won't find any of that particular flavour you get from the salt, It doesn't come through the salt because it's getting distilled, but it gives a beautiful edge to it. It just kills off the sweetness. It seems to enhance the malt that's coming in there. It seems to have this fantastic, I wouldn't say a marine note, it's quite hard to explain, but I would say it's more malty than it is fruity, if you know what I mean. And so it does make a big difference. It's got to make a big difference. I mean, we're lashed by rain for half the bloody year, But all credit to the farmers. I mean, all the farmers in Islay are growing for, virtually all the farmers now are growing, the ones who do grow barley are growing for Bruichladdich. And you've got to think of the bigger picture. It's 100% Islay, which is fantastic. But not only that, it's creating a future for the farmer and his family. Because mad cow disease, that killed all the bloody animals. The other animals were shot. They never recovered. You maybe don't remember the mad cow disease. That really showed how vulnerable Islay was. They were breeding cattle all the time, and then they were all shot. And the farmers were destitute, and we came into Bruichladdich. I remember talking right back at the beginning, 2001, talking to some farmers, and we started off with 2 farmers, and then quickly the word spread, and now I think there's 21 farmers growing barley for Bruichladdich, and it makes a big difference to the flavour of the whiskey. It's got to.
Edward Milner is asking, does warehouse location influence flavor, and do maritime notes come from the sea air? I know that you guys matured everything at Bruichladdich on the island, so I know that not all the distilleries on Islay mature their whiskey on the island. So what makes the difference in warehouse location?
It just depends. The cask breathes, as you know, otherwise we wouldn't have the Angel share. Okay, the cask is breathing. Alcohol expands in the summertime when it gets warm. It never gets that warm in Islay, but there's expansion there. And it's like a lung. It breathes in and breathes out. Does it breathe in the air of Islay? Yeah, sure. Does it make a big difference? I'm not so sure. I really don't. I always got that citrus note in Islay whiskies, and Bruichladdich in particular, I've got that kind of citrus lemon. Now, is that coming from the cask, or is that coming from the soil? It's really, really hard to determine. Particularly the cask is a refill cask or a first fill. You can imagine the hit you get from a first fill bourbon barrel It's super saturated with bourbon. You have to be a bloody bloodhound to track down there's a gale force wind from Islay and you can get the salt. That's impossible. It's just impossible. But there's a distinct different freshness about it. But then again, we use peat. So Sherlock Holmes couldn't trace it. You know what I mean? You're talking about the flavour of the seed, but it's all peated. Now, there's the peat that's got salt in it as well. And all these herbs growing on top of it, the heather and all that sort of stuff. You can't actually define it. It's impossible to define what's doing it. If it's matured in Islay, it's going to be different from an Islay matured on the mainland, for sure, because the air is different, it's breathing in, and that is noted. I can tell you that right away. If it's matured in a palletised warehouse in Glasgow, it's not going to be the same as being stored in Islay, where the air is moist all the time. It's one of these great things you talk about all night. That's why Bruichladdich matures all its whiskey in Islay, 100%. That makes it different. Plus, the soil in which the Islay barley is grown for Bruichladdich is full of salt. The rain is coming down all the time. So there must be a difference there. And I think that difference in the Bruichladdich is it gives it that fantastic citrus note. That's the note that comes through. And it works for the oak as well. You know, that's just through nosy and taste. I'm not a scientist. I mean, but it's got to make a difference. It must make a difference. And it does make it. We believe in that one. Terroir is Mark's word. It's the French word, the terroir. And Mark got it absolutely right. And
Peter Polker is asking. Go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And as a result of that, there's now all the farmers are fully employed, or the majority are fully employed growing barley for Bruichladdich. They've now got new tractors. They're doing really well. They're turning over soil that hadn't been turned over for centuries. And the economy of the island has risen dramatically just by that move. And that was down to Mark and Simon. It was their idea. They were the wine guys. And they said, well, it's got to make a difference. And it does make a difference.
Now, Peter Polker is asking, is Black Art 4.1 the whiskey you like the most? Peter says you mentioned something like that in the Scotch A Golden Dream movie during your final tasting at Bruichladdich. Is 4.1 one of your favorites? And tell me how you came up with Black Art in the first place.
Sorry?
And tell me how you came up with the concept for Black Art in the first place. Because everything that transparency-wise.
I can tell you. Yeah, you got it. You got it. I was tired reading tasting notes. I mean, some of the tasting notes I read that other people write, I mean, it's just, some of them are just driving nuts. You know, it smells like, ripe bananas and a wet Tuesday morning with the wind from the east. What are you talking about? You know, it's just bullshit, you know. But so I made, everybody was telling me all this sort of stuff. So I decided to do Black Art and not tell anyone anything about it. People say, what's the cask you used? Was it Chateau Yquem, or did you use Oloroso, or did you use Margaux, or did you use Barolo, or did you use Bourbon? Black Art was a work of the devil. The devil creates black art, right? It's a work of the devil. So I was the devil. I wanted to make a whiskey that was delicious, exciting, luxury. And people said Bruichladdich is a one-trick pony. No, we're doing Bruichladdich, up to more, and all this stuff. And I was creating all sorts of stuff. And Black Art was just a decadent. You know you shouldn't do it, but you're going to do it because you're weak. And you can't resist it. It's absolutely, and you don't pour that for your friends unless they're really, really good. You just pour in the usual stuff. Keep the Black Art for yourself. It's a beautiful, beautiful creation. And I passed the recipe on to Alan and Adam. So they won't tell you either. It's a secret. Thank God there's one whiskey in the world that nobody hears anything about. You think of all the whiskies in the world, and there's only one out there that doesn't tell you anything. It's the work of the devil. It's the Black Art.
Now, I will admit, I've told this story before, but my first experience with Black Art was during the Phage in 2010 at the party you guys throw at the campground every year during the Phage, the night before Bruichladdich open day. Robin Lang was playing. And we're all back at Simon's place down near Portnahaven playing croquet by car headlights at 4:00 in the morning, killing bottle after bottle of Black Art. And the next day, later that morning, by noon, I'm over at the distillery for your open day, and I swear to God, I did not have a headache. And if that isn't black magic, I don't know what is.
I can just see you at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you're absolutely up to there with alcohol, and you're thinking, "This is cool, man. This is hedonistic. I'm playing bowls at 4 o'clock in the morning, drinking one of the greatest whiskey in the world. What have I done wrong with my life?" Oh, that's a great story. I can see you doing that, actually. I can see you staggering about.
You were there. You hadn't been to bed yet.
Was I there?
Yeah, it was at Simon Coughlin's party at his house.
Yes. Every year we'd have a party at Simon's. That's right, yeah.
Now, Greg Fraser says, we know you're most proud of Black Art from your time at Bruichladdich, but what are you most proud of from Bowmore? I just tried a 30-year-old that you would have distilled back in the day.
Yeah.
The 30-year-old they just came out with, and that would have been one of yours.
Probably the best Bowmore I ever tasted. Bowmore are all good, and I'm not saying I was the best distiller there. There's a lot better men than me went before me. You're going back to 1779, but certainly the quality of casks that I had to work with, particularly when Suntory came in, there was no limit in the budget. You were told to buy the best. You understand? That was the one good thing about Suntory. Completely refurb the distillery and we want you to make the best whiskey in the world. That was my remit. And don't worry about the money. And so I was very, very lucky to be able to buy all sorts of Oloroso sherry casks at a huge price. And I think in 1964, Oloroso sherry Bowmore was one of the greatest whiskies in the world. And I was just in my first year as an apprentice, but I was stored in number 1 vaults, the warehouse right beside the sea. And if you had to ask me what was the most memorable dram of my life, I was invited, when I was on the road, I was invited to go to the head office of Suntory to meet the president, a gentleman by the name of Shintori, who was revered throughout Japan. Do you understand? He had been American educated. I think he had gone to one of the great universities in America. Spoke beautiful, beautiful American English. A gentleman, one of the nicest people, probably one of the best moments of my life. And so I was summoned. I was out there teaching Japanese people Suntory people about single malt and what makes Bowmore and Auchentoshan and Glengarry are different. So I was working hard, travelling hard, and I got the golden ticket at I had met Shintori before when I was the manager at Bowmore when Morrison's sold it to Suntory. And that was a big hush-hush because even I didn't know who was coming. I just got word from our chairman to say that, Jim, tomorrow morning there's going to be 3 helicopters arriving at the distillery about 10 o'clock in the morning. And I think, okay, can you get a place to land them? I said, yeah, we'll land them at the school. There's plenty of room there. I'll speak to the head teacher and the kids can see all the helicopters coming down. It's like Thunderbirds are going. Oh, my 2 kids were in primary school then, right? In that school. So I had no idea what was happening. And sure enough, I'm there and coming across the Paps of Jura, it's like Vietnam. You've got the 3 helicopters coming in. Remember the Vietnam films, the helicopters one above the other? And these helicopters landed, and I was completely unaware of who was stepping off the helicopters. And just before the doors opened, my chairman told me, he said, Jim, today we are selling Bowmore to Suntory. I'm thinking, holy shit, you're selling to a Japanese company? How is that going to go down in the world of whiskey? Will we be regarded as Judas? Have we betrayed Christ? Are we betraying the whiskey industry? That was what was going through my... It's not, I'm just a manager. I'm way down the pecking order. Anyway, I I remember meeting him, and it was Shintori, his wife, the entourage, the lawyers and the whole lot. We went down to the distillery, and Shintori, as I say, was educated in America, and as we were walking from the helicopters past the primary school and the playing fields, my two daughters, it was playtime at school, and my two daughters ran out and took my hand, and I'm trying to get rid of him. I'm walking beside the most important man in Japan, and these two kids are hanging on to me, and I'm trying to get rid of them. And I said, right, go back to school. On you go. But Dad, we want to walk with you. Can we go in the helicopters? I said, I don't know. And Shintori and his wife, his wife bent down and said to my daughter Lynn, and what is your name? And she said, my name is Lynn McEwan, and I'm in primary 4, and I'm very good. Very good. And they went down to Leslie and said, what's your name? And she said, my name's Leslie. She had 2 teeth missing at the front, so Leslie sounded like Leslie. And she said, what about you, Leslie? She said, my name's Leslie Kuhn, and I'm in P1. And I have a horse called Oliver. Oh, really? Said the president of Suntory's wife. And I'm trying to shake them off. And Suntory said, would you like to go on to the helicopters? And very kindly, he allowed all the kids from they told the pilot, his interpreter, to tell the pilot to allow the kids onto the helicopter. So it was a big day for the kids in Beaumont Prime. And then we're going down to the distillery, and I was thinking, wow. And the book was signed, the big check was signed, and that was it. A moment in history. And I remember drawing a dram from number 1 vaults, a black war from a sherry cask. And he tasted and he thought, oh, this is really, really wonderful. So it was all signed, and I expected a lot of flack from the Scottish people and England. We've sold out the Japanese. You are Judas. You have sold to the Japanese and blah, blah. But it couldn't have been better. Suntory were absolutely fantastic. The president said to me, he said, Jim, we want to make Beaumont a number 1 distillery. If you tell me and tell my people what you need to make it a number 1. And he was just a fabulous, fabulous guy, and obviously American educated. And it was great. The helicopters took off, and I'm thinking, wow, what a chance this is. Many years later, I was teaching Suntory staff, and I ended up in Tokyo on my last gig. I was doing Yokohama, I was doing Osaka, I was doing Kobe, all these places. And I was invited up to meet the president. And as a gift from Morrison's, when he bought the distillery, he was given a bottle of Black Beaumont, a beautiful, beautiful draught. And I went up to his office, and there he was, a great man. And he said, hi, Jim, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing fine, thanks. Yeah. And he said, you're doing a good job teaching. And the bartenders love you, and everybody loves you. I said, well, I don't think my wife loves me. I haven't seen her for weeks. But anyway, on his office wall, a special cabinet, was the bottle of Beaumont 1964, which he had received as a gift from Morrison's the day he signed the book. And he said, Jim, I'm sorry, I have to leave you now. I said, no, I was just, thank you for seeing me. You know, he said, no, you've been working so hard. He says, but I really have to go to a meeting. But Jim, you see the bottle? You recognize that bottle? I said, yeah, that's the bottle you got when you bought the company. He said, yeah, you're right. He said, I would like you to open that bottle and have the first dram from the bottle. I said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't do that. It's a very special thing in your life. I said, Jim, please open the bottle. And I said, okay, I didn't want to offend him. So he duly left the office, and I opened the cabinet. I'm the tallest building in Tokyo, right? And I poured myself a large measure. Hell, you might as well do it well, you know. I poured myself what we call a stoter of a dram, you know. I'm standing there, and I'm looking out over Tokyo, and I'm sipping probably one of the greatest Beaumonts of all time. And I asked myself the question, Jim McEwan, where did it all go wrong for you? where did it all go wrong for you? I'm standing in the president's office drinking his whiskey. Where did it all go wrong for me? It was one of the greatest moments ever. So, yeah, Black Bowmore. So, that's
and let's clarify, because Tatsuya Ishihara raised a question while we were at the beginning of the story about you were concerned that there might be some backlash when Suntory came in and bought Bowmore. Explain what the situation was in Scotland at the time that could have led to a backlash, which there never was. And as you've pointed out, they have been excellent stewards of Bowmore ever since. But there was a thought at the time. This was back in the early 80s when you had Japanese car companies taking over, or really dominating the car industry, and Japanese investment in Western properties and real estate and things like that. And for lack of a better term, yes, there was a backlash at some point, in some points in some countries because of that. And I think that was the concern that really turned out to be completely dead wrong in this case, right?
Absolutely. But you can understand it because, and it goes back to the war. There's no question about that. And, a lot of people in Islay had suffered at the hands of the Japanese. And I remember one time going to the pub and this guy said, "Oh, you're pals now with the Japanese, with Suntory." I said, "Look, mate, they're doing a great job. They're investing a huge amount of money in this distillery." And I said, "We weren't angels ourselves. I mean, our country is one of the most violent countries in the world. We've dominated the world. Just think about that. We used to own half the bloody world. So don't talk to me about how good we were. I mean, we dominated everywhere. India, for Christ's sake, a tiny island like Britain, and we're the bosses of India. Get real." So I took a bit of flack, but I was so impressed with them, and true to the word, whatever I asked for, they gave me. And it was absolutely fantastic. But that moment in the tallest building in Tokyo, drinking the first bottle from the first bottle, now, how kind was that? He should have kept that. But he gave me the opportunity, and I was forever grateful. It was just, I loved working in Japan. That was absolutely fantastic.
Now, Dave Kuhn says he would like to hear you recount the Charlie McLean story about somebody cheating at a blind tasting at a bar, 4 drinks and nailed it because somebody paid off the bartender. Was this you who did that, or was this Charlie that did that?
It was me. Yeah, well, I can't remember where we were doing it. And there was this guy who was a total pain in the arse. And we were on about the 6th dram, and he had too much to drink. And he went up to the bar and he bought, I think, 3 different whiskies. And I think he mixed them up a little bit, put a little bit into him. But anyway, maybe not. He just bought 3 whiskies, right? 3 single malts. And I knew what was coming. I knew he was going to test me, and he was going to ask me the distillery and the year and all that sort of stuff. So I excused myself and I went to the toilet, and I gave the bartender £5. I said, "What was the 3 whiskies that guy just bought?" He said there was a Dalmore, blah, 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 and another one. So I went up and I nosed them. I said, "That's a 12-year-old Klein Leash. That's a 14-year-old Macallan. And this is a 21-year-old something else." The guy just about collapsed. He said, "I don't believe it." I said, "They're a really nice whiskey." And to that day, he thinks I'm an expert, but I'm not really. I'm just a cooper from Ireland, you know what I mean? But that's one of these lousy tricks that where people would play on you when you're doing a tasting. You've stood there for 2 hours, you've given them everything, you've tried to educate them, and you've got a smart arse like that comes up and tries to make you look like a fool. You know what I mean? And that's not fair. Particularly, can you tell me what age it is? No, I can't tell you ages, you know. But that's very rare. So it happened to me. But anyway, we got the guy sorted out. He was absolutely amazing. He thought I was a genius, and he still does think I'm a genius, but that's okay. When you're judging whiskey at international level, as you know, most of it's done blind. You know, international wine spirit competition, I've done thousands of competitions, and you're nosing blind. And when you're nosing blind, you're given a region, Speyside 10 years and under, or Speyside 20 years and under, or Speyside. And to try and guess which Speyside it was, you know, it's almost impossible. The human doesn't have that capability. A machine can tell you. Gas chromatography can tell you. Can tell you all the peaks and troughs and fit. So I hate people like that who try to, once they've had a few drinks, tell me, do you enjoy it? That's the main. If you enjoy it, that's fine by me. I don't care where it comes from. As long as it's well made and well matured, and it's fine. You need a bloodhound to tell you the age of it, the distillery, the type of wood. I mean, get real. Start drinking wine, you son of a bitch. Leave people alone.
Great question from Sergio Floridis at the Irish Whiskey Magazine. Do you think the Scotch Whisky Association could make any changes or do more to help Scotch whiskey? Or just a corollary, should they just stay out of the way and let you guys make it?
I think they do a good job to make sure they are referees. They are not promoters. They are not the marketing division. They are the referees. They make sure it's a fair playing field. There's nothing they can add other than make sure that the distillers abide by the rules. And they are so important because without them, it would be a free-for-all. They have set the bar and you must stick to that. You understand? They are not a marketing machine. They are there to make sure that everybody is on the same playing field and everybody is treated the same way. The SWA are essential. They are a watchdog and they do a great job.
Now, I remember, when the X4 came out and the SWA was complaining about this thing as one of the most irresponsible things, a 4 times distilled whiskey that anybody could do. I seem to recall that there was a certain amount of gnashing of teeth from a certain part of the western end of Loch Indal about the SWA back in those days.
Yeah. That was a bad move on their part. I read about it, the quadruple distilled. I read about it in a book, and it said, if you take 1 spoonful of this quadruple distillers, you would live forever. 2, you would go blind, and 3 teaspoonfuls, you would drop dead. Your heart would stop instantly. I thought, shit, that sounds great. I got to make it. So I made it, and we got some flack from the Scotch Whisky Association. But Lochentoshan and places like that doing triple distillation. I'm just taking it one step beyond that. And if you don't try, you'll never know. You understand? You can guess, but actually make it. And then there's no argument left. This is what it tastes like. And nobody in the world had done it before. They'd done it before, but centuries before. Uisci Babor, it's called Uisci Babor. 4 times distilled. And they said if you 1 spoonful, you lived forever. 2 spoonfuls, you went blind. And 3 spoonfuls, your heart stopped. I thought, God, that's good. 1 spoonful, you live forever. I'm going to live forever. I'm going to have a crack at that. I quite fancy being around for a while. So I made it, and it was really scary when you've got pot still and you're distilling 4 times, and the strength is heading up towards 90% alcohol, and the still starts shaking. It's not an easy job to do because I could have blown the bloody village up, but I didn't. And now we have X4, and it's never been done since, and it'll never be done again, I don't think. But sometimes you've got to step outside the aircraft.
We had a question about the television show where somebody brought a race car to Islay and you guys fueled it with the X4 Spirit. Yeah, they wanted to know if you got to drive that car.
No, I didn't. But it was really quite funny because we put the X4 into the tank and I contacted the police. I didn't tell the police what was going into the tank, right? I just said we're trying out this, but I didn't say it was 4 times distilled. I didn't elaborate on it. We just want to try this in a racing car. So I think it was 3 policemen at that time, it was a full team. And they came down and they were very, very helpful. And there was a guy called, it was Oz Clark that was there and his buddy, a very famous chef. And the police came down and they stopped the traffic to give us a racetrack down on the road to Bruichladdich, the bit round the head of the loch. And all the sheep were chased off and the revving and this racing car took off and it was incredible, the noise that was coming from it. and right down, I don't know what speed it went. It was phenomenal speed, and then he turned and he came back again, and it was absolutely amazing. It was great fun. It showed that you could use a quadruple distilled spirit to run a racing car. But the fun thing for me was we had the local police force were there making sure it was all right. And the smell of whiskey, the air was just phenomenal. You've got these policemen and this car is just reeking of alcohol. They must have thought, the guy who's driving that is totally pissed. No, he wasn't pissed. He was all right. It was the fumes coming from it. It was one of the greatest smells I've ever had. And the car went really, really well. I've got to say, it was performed beautifully. But that's what we did at Bruichladdich. We pushed the envelope. It had to be fun as well. We didn't take ourselves too seriously.
And the question we had was from Mark Williams. He asked this earlier, too. When you distill 4 times, don't you lose the flavor in the spirit, though? But you make up for it in the cask, right?
You definitely do. Absolutely right. You produce a very, very fine spirit, and it's absolutely pure. So when it gets into the cask, it's an instant hit because it's so pure. A second distillation, there's still a lot of oil in there, and some of that oil can coat the stave, you understand, but it's pure. It's going straight into the staves, and extraction on it was phenomenal. So the maturation was half the time of a regular spirit, just because it was so pure. And then when you cut it with water, it's expensive to do, but we did it because nobody else. It had been recorded in 14 something. It was done years and years ago. We only made a small batch. I mean, I'm talking about 100 years before. Yeah, it was good fun. But that was a good thing about Bruichladdich. We pushed the boat out and did things that nobody else thought was possible or would be allowed to do. I mean, they're all good distillers. There's no doubt about that. There's not a bad distiller. And yeah, we did some crazy things at Bruichladdich, Just experiment. Bruichladdich became like a laboratory, if you follow me. And we were trying things. I mean, some of the wine casks that were coming in, people hated wine casks, but Mark and Simon, they brought in the best Firth grows. We had Barolo, we came, the whole lot. The flavour was far, far ahead of the sherry, you understand? It was bringing new fruit flavours to a spirit, and particularly a peated spirit. It was quite amazing, that combination. You think, that shouldn't work, but it does work, So, yeah, we probably took the whiskey industry forward a decade with the experiments we were doing. It was really good.
You dragged them kicking and screaming.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are using wine casks now, so yeah, it was a wise move, and everybody's claiming they were the first, but it doesn't matter. Nobody remembers who came second. Everybody remembers who came first, and we were the first to do it at that level. And because of Mark and Simon and their association with the wine industry, it was great. I loved the wine casks. Jesus, I just loved them.
Did you have a favorite among the wine casks?
Yeah, Chateau d'Yquem. Yeah, I just loved Bruichladdich and Chateau d'Yquem. I thought, this is too good to be true. That beautiful Sauterne fruitiness in there. Oh my God, the viscosity of it. And Bruichladdich. And when you put an Octomore in there, it's Beauty and the Beast. You think, these guys are not going to get on because it's the most heavy peated malt in the world. But it didn't. It was Beauty and the Beast. It was like, oh my God, this shouldn't happen. So, yeah, loved it. And Port Charlotte as well.
Dave Kuhn says his favorite whiskey of all time was a Port Charlotte matured in a Vin de Naturel cask.
Yeah, Port Charlotte does well. It's a great whiskey. And we did try to open Port Charlotte Distillery, Dave, which was called Loch and Dall. That was the real name for it. But we just, at that particular time, I got the plans done and we were all set to go to reopen Bruichladdich. But if we reopened Bruichladdich, we wouldn't have money for the production of Bruichladdich. So then I had to make Port Charlotte. And it was really quite a complicated discussion I had with a very old gentleman called Roderick MacLeod, who had been a stillman at Bruichladdich for many years. A real character, just a fabulous guy. A real character, just full of laughs and knowledge and all that sort of stuff. So he used to call in every Friday for a dram, and I would have a dram with him, and he would tell me some outrageous stories, and I would tell him even more outrageous stories. It was really good over a dram. Just pure lies, we're just telling lies to each other, which was quite good. All about whiskey, because he was in whiskey and I was in whiskey. And I said, Rudy, we're thinking of opening Loch-and-Dol Distillery and getting up and running again. And I said, did you work there? And he said, oh, yes, Jim. Oh, yes, I worked. He didn't work there. He was just telling a lie, but I knew that. Oh, yes, I worked there, he said. And I said, and I'd given him a big glass of whiskey. He always got a big glass of whiskey. And he just finished off the glass of whiskey, and I said, can you remember what the whiskey was like, Rudy? He says, well, if there was something in my glass, I might remember it. So out came the bottle, and I filled the glass. I took the hint, and he's sipping away, and he's saying, well, Jim, it was like this, and I'm just thinking here what it was like, and the second glass is going down fairly quickly, and he said, well, Rudy, I said, what was it like? He said, well, Jim, it was good. Cheerio, Jim, I've got to go now. So that was my total immersion. What was it like? I wanted him to say it was medium peated, lightly peated, or what was it like? He said, Jim, it was good. Thanks, pal. Classic man, eh? That's what you call classic. Drinks 2 glasses of your best whiskey and tells you nothing. That is cool. That is really cool.
Well, you have told us a lot more than nothing over the last hour and 45 minutes. It's getting close to midnight in Islay. Jim, thank you for doing this.
It's been a pleasure.
It has been...
And it's good to have a chat with you. We haven't spoken for a while and all. And thank you for the hard work that you do as an ambassador for all whiskies. I mean, you do a good job.
Thank you.
And I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, If I thought you were a dickhead, I would tell you. You've been a real hard-working, loyal fan for single malt. You've been a disciple for many, many years. And we need guys like you who tell it as it is, And so it's been a pleasure seeing you again and talking to you again. And I'll raise a glass to you and slanjava.
And I never asked you what was in your glass. What are you drinking tonight?
This is my favourite whiskey, the whiskey I drink most of. I don't drink a lot of whiskey, but my all-time go-to dram is Bruichladdich Classic. I just love it. It's young, it's vibrant, it's American oak. It's fabulous, and it's not too expensive. I've got older whiskies, but this is my go-to dram. That's the one.
That's the one. I've got it right here within reach.
Yeah.
Just off to the left.
Okay, good night, everybody, and thank you for the pleasure of listening to an old man rambling on the West Coast with a storm about to hit us. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers, Jim. Thank you so much. Once again, that's our Happy Hour live webcast from February 12th, 2021 with Scotch whiskey legend Jim McEwan just before his retirement. I hope you'll join us for our live webcasts every Friday at 5 p.m. New York time, 10 p.m. London time, and during the summer, 2100 GMT. You can watch them and submit your own questions on our YouTube channel and the WhiskeyCast Facebook page. They're also available on Twitter and Twitch. You can get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskeyCast. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Thanks again to our presenting sponsors, Dewar's and Redbreast, along with Writer's Tears, Sagamore Spirit, and Oban. Don't forget to join us each week for our regular episode of WhiskeyCast with more cask strength conversation. Our latest episode features my interview with Jack Daniels historian Nelson Eddy from my visit last week to the distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, along with the week's whiskey news and much more. WhiskeyCast is a presentation of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.